What is up, everybody? Welcome to another weekend roundup here on Touchline Talk. As always, before I jump in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week on YouTube. Plenty to get to this weekend across Europe, starting in the FA Cup. Your high-profile matchup, of course, Arsenal-Manchester City. Manchester City get the win. There was not a lot happening in attack in this game. Ultimately, it comes down to one moment. City get the goal, and they advance. I don't really have too much on the game itself. It's also weird trying to draw conclusions from an FA Cup game when both these teams have bigger priorities. So I'm not going to dive into the game in terms of actually what we saw on the field because there just wasn't a lot going on there. The point I want to make, though, and I kind of hinted at this before the game during the weekend look ahead on the live show. This was a incredibly important win for Manchester City. Had they lost this game, you're looking at two potential trophies. The Premier League, which every single week it looks increasingly unlikely they're going to catch Arsenal, and the Champions League, which obviously is always the top prize. Maybe they win it, maybe they don't. There's certainly no guarantee there. You can't go banking on winning a Champions League. And also just the single elimination round by round format makes it more difficult to be confident of anything about what happened in that tournament, as Manchester City know quite well considering some of their exits they've had recently. Those were your two chances to win trophies if you don't win this game. And every single season, since Pep Guardiola has gotten this thing going, City have come away with something. Maybe they didn't win the Premier League, but they won, Carabao Cup after Carabao Cup. Or they do have an FA Cup in there. Or they win the league. There's something to look back on and say, at least there's silverware that came out of this season. Now it looks much more likely between the Champions League and their hopes in the Premier League and the FA Cup. It looks like now there's a much better chance that streak is going to continue and they're going to come away with some silverware. Still have plenty to do to actually get that silverware and get to a final. But you compare that to what was at stake for Arsenal in this game. Arsenal have much bigger things to worry about than winning an FA Cup. Now, it would have been great if they could have kept going, but they're not built at this point to go fight on, four fronts at the same time. So they've got themselves now focused on the two most important. They can absolutely win the Europa League and should be trying to do that. And of course, the Premier League is the top priority. So, yeah, it would have been great to keep going. Also, there's an argument that there's still enough rounds left that maybe this was a net positive for Arsenal. For City, this was massive. Usually, it's the other way around for City, where, if you get a run in the FA Cup, it's the cherry on top. You've already got to the final of the League Cup or you're in the semis or whatever, and you're doing just fine in the Champions League. You're probably going to win the Premier League. Maybe Liverpool's on your tail. And the FA Cup is just lower on the priority list. And the way this season has gone changes that. And so Manchester City get through, and now they do have three opportunities and one really good one in the FA Cup to get a trophy this season, even though it's not going the way they necessarily hoped. Wrexham, almost. Find a way to advance. Ultimately have to settle for a thrilling 3-3 draw with Sheffield United to force it to a replay. So Wrexham will be on the road the second time around. 2 games against championship teams, 7 goals for Wrexham. Now, they've also conceded plenty of goals. They had this game won until John Egan got an equalizer in stoppage time while Sheffield United were down a man. There's been some bad things defensively, which is to be expected when you're a National League team playing a championship team that was recently in the Premier League. But I want to make 2 points off of this, as Wrexham continue this run and are still alive in the FA Cup. 1, we are just getting consistently reminded, as they perform well against a second championship team, they just have no business being in the National League. It's the reality of the situation because of where they were when they got bought. But this is not a National League team. This is at least a League Two team. And you're seeing it with what they're doing in the FA Cup. They're taking care of business in the league. Now they got to make sure they get that automatic promotion spot. There's still work to do. But now they have done this twice. Their goal difference against championship teams in the FA Cup through 180 minutes is positive. That is remarkable, but we got to keep this in the proper context. It is, like I just said, it's remarkable, but it is not stunning. This is not your typical Cinderella story. This is a team that is way better than the league they're playing in. They have got to get themselves to League Two because this team is at a point, this club is at a point, and the financial investment is at a point where they need to be playing in the league structure. This is not a non-league club anymore. And they're showing you that by the way they're performing. Now they got to actually finish this thing and get... We'll see if they can keep going in the FA Cup, and they got to finish this thing and get themselves promoted to League Two. The second thing. I do want to bring MLS and the Apple agreement that is going to take place here and kick in this season into this conversation for a second. Just to say this. Part of what is being presented as MLS moves to Apple is the storytelling element that Apple is going to go all in on Major League Soccer, and you're going to get much more in-depth, meaningful coverage that's going to not just cover games, but actually cover the league and tell its stories. Wrexham, and the fact that they are, ESPN is milking this for all it's worth, and rightfully so, because people care about Wrexham, is exactly why this aspect of the MLS Apple agreement is so important, and I don't think it's getting enough attention. The captivation with Wrexham doesn't have all that much to do with Wrexham. It has to do with the fact that some intelligent people who have been very successful in the entertainment industry know how to tell you a compelling story and make you care about something you didn't know existed. That is what MLS has to do as well, because MLS has not done a good job of that at all. There are all kinds of fascinating stories in Major League Soccer. Bizarre things happen all the time. It's what makes the league great. But you got to get it in front of people, and you got to present them with the opportunity to be entertained by it. They're not necessarily coming looking for it. You have to give it to them. Nobody was watching Wrexham until all of a sudden Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney came in and presented it to you in the form of this documentary series thing. This is what MLS has to do. They have got to find a way to bring an entertaining story and to capitalize on the entertaining stories that exist in this league to people to grow this fan base. Wrexham is showing you how it can be done. MLS needs to take note. The other FA Cup game, real quickly, Brighton come back to beat Liverpool and advance. The only thing I want to say out of this game is that Kaoru Mitoma is just out of his mind at this moment. He has been sensational since he got into the starting lineup. He's been one of the best players in the league. He gets the late winner in this one. He's phenomenal. Brighton somehow, some way, and now, Arsenal are reportedly trying to get this Moses Caicedo deal over the line. We'll see if it happens. Just without fail, Brighton continue to find gem after gem after gem. It is remarkable. And here they are making an FA Cup run, fighting to try and qualify for a European competition, and players come and go, and more brilliant ones just replace them. And the next kind of most recent example of that is Mitoma. He's been absolutely sensational. A couple other things to hit on. The Bundesliga. Bayern blew another lead and drew for a third consecutive game coming out of the World Cup break. Union Berlin, Freiburg, Leipzig, and Dortmund, the teams chasing them, all won. And so this gap has gotten very, very slim again, to the point where all these teams are within 3. I have said this before. I'm just going to continue to point it out now that Bayern have, for a second time this season, gone 3 games without winning in the Bundesliga. This kind of fell away when Bayern put together that winning streak right before the World Cup. And it kind of looked like, okay, here's Bayern's back in control. It hasn't been perfect, but It's, most of these other teams have had really inconsistent stretches as well. And then they went back to looking like the team that had that poor run near the beginning of the season. And now everybody is right there on their tails again. And the other part of this, Leipzig, terrific form. Dortmund, I mean, it hasn't been perfect coming out of the World Cup break, but they're winning. Union Berlin kind of fell off for a little while. They're back. Leipzig had an awful stretch in the first half of the season. Dortmund had some really rough patches. Like I said, Union Berlin fell off a little bit. It's not like all these teams have played great. They all might be playing their best soccer right now. Leipzig certainly are. And Dortmund are kind of getting there, and Union Berlin are back on track. Somebody is going to make Bayern actually win this league. They are still the clear favorites in my mind, because somebody has to overtake them for that to even possibly change. But if Bayern continue to draw all of these games and don't perform the way they need to, one of these teams is going to be there to push them until the end. If you want my pick, it's Leipzig. I've been saying that. But somebody's going to make them earn it. And that's a good thing for the Bundesliga, and it doesn't happen every single season. Usually, Bayern can kind of coast. Maybe Dortmund are in there for a while. But this is as bad as Bayern have been in the league in a long time. And there are 4 teams right there ready to take advantage. I don't see any way that Bayern win this league comfortably at this point. Now, it's entirely possible they go. There of course is a way, because they could go on a run. I don't see that happening. I think one of these teams is going to stay really, really hot the rest of the season and is going to make this a really interesting race. It was interesting for the first, third or so of the season. Then Bayern went on that run to make it not so interesting by the time the World Cup went around. And now we're 3 games back in, and it is compelling once again because Bayern have already dropped 6 points, and all of these other teams are taking advantage. Finally, I want to talk about what's happening to AC Milan. Over the weekend, they lost to Sassuolo, a team that's been struggling this season, 5-2 at home. AC Milan are winless in their last 5 games. They've conceded 14 goals and scored 6 in those 5 games. And by the way, their next game is Inter Milan. I have brought up at points this idea that AC Milan have not been as convincing as you would like. They certainly don't look as good as they were last season. And Napoli are just, at this point, running away with this thing. But it hasn't been this bad. And all of a sudden, they have just fallen apart. And now, your Lazios of the world, who have not done a good job beating the teams they're supposed to, but find ways to get a lot of points off of the best other teams they're fighting with in the Champions League spots, are in prime position, and Inter, who have not had a good season, are in prime position to capitalize. And Roma are also right there, fighting for these Champions League spots because nobody outside of Napoli has been able to capitalize on anything. And so I just wanted to bring this AC Milan run up because it's not just that they're not winning. Some of these games, they're getting smoked. Some by good teams, some by Sassuolo. It's coming undone, and thankfully for them, Juventus, at least for the moment, are out of this Champions League conversation because of the sanctions. But it's just been a kind of this rotating door of who's the second best team in this league. And I still think it's Juventus. They're obviously not going to be there in the table. But this was a prime opportunity for AC Milan to stop the bleeding and to kind of get this thing back on track. And instead, they lost by 3 goals and conceded 5 times to Sassuolo. So this is setting up a fascinating Milan derby with where AC Milan are at. So wanted to bring that up as well. A big storyline coming out of Italy. That is all for the weekend roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.